having all 5 presentations first and then continuing for discussions following that. Thank you.
So, thank you, Dr. Nisha. Good morning, everyone present here. I'm Professor Priti Saxena from India. I would like to thank the organizers for this first conference by Office of National Unity and Reconciliation, Sri Lanka. I'll discuss on the role of women in resolving the differences through understanding. Now we know that with the male and female ratio in the world population, that is almost running neck to neck. And as per 2021 data, we know that 101.68 male per 100 females. So this is a very close ratio in the population. But the conflict resolution and negotiating for peace is still a male-dominated area, we know. Despite the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, that is of 1995, the fourth Women Conference in Beijing that convinces the women's empowerment and their full participation on the basis of equality in all spheres of the society. That includes the participation in the decision-making process and the access to power, which is very fundamental for the achievement of equality, development, and peace. So an environment that maintains the world peace and that promotes and protects the human rights, democracy, and the peaceful settlement of disputes, that is in accordance with the principles of non-threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence. And at the same time, the respect for sovereignty, as we see that has been set forth by the Charter of the United Nations, is an important factor for the advancement of women. So this Beijing Declaration of 1995, that is a platform for action also, that confers all these equality powers to the women, that provides for, that convinces for peace, that is inextricably linked with the equality between women and men, and for the development that is there. And we see that the armed and the other types of the conflicts and hostages that are still persist in many parts of the world. And so we find that in a world of continuing instability and violence, the implementation of the cooperative approaches to the peace and security is urgently required. The equal access and full participation of women in power structures and their full involvement in the all efforts for the prevention and resolution of conflicts, that is essential. And that is essential for the maintenance and promotion of peace and security. So during times of armed conflicts and the collapse of communities, you see the women's role is very, very crucial. And they often work to preserve social order in the midst of the armed and the other conflicts. But women who makes the important role, but unrecognized contribution as peace educators, both in their families and in the societies. So this is the great backlog for the women, that they do perform good things, but they are not recognized, or they are under recognized the contribution they made for the peace educators, for the peace building by their understanding. Besides Beijing Declaration and Platform of Action, 21 years ago, on the same day, 31st October 2000, the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security adoption is also very, very important. That is a specific, this resolution is significant because it is the first resolution passed by the Security Council, and that specifically addresses the distinct and disproportionate effect of war on women and their often undervalued and underutilized contribution to both. The prevention and resolution of the conflicts and the maintenance of peace and security, specifically the Security Council called for the adoption of a gender perspective in the negotiation and implementation of peace agreements, their active participation and in the maintenance and promotion of peace and security, and the support of the local women's peace initiatives and indigenous processes for conflict resolution. This was all we find in the resolution that is of 1325 of the Security Council. However, we see that the women are still significantly underrepresented, or we see that they are entirely absent from the peace negotiation. There appears to be a complete disconnect between the pledges which have been made by these states to increase the women participation and their translation of this pledge into practice. Almost all the constitutions in the world, they prescribe for the equality rights to the male and female, to the men and women. But when it comes to translate into practice, then this equality is not seen, and that is how we see that there is a complete disconnect between the pledges, between the provisions, between the various acts and enactments made by the state, and that is not being increasing the women's participation, though as I told you the ratio of the population at world level is very close, it is not negligible. So major progress in this regard at a global level is yet to be seen, is yet to become, is yet to be witnessed by the women in the world community. Though know that in general men and women have different conflict management styles, we know, because it's a matter of peace building or the understanding or resolving the differences. So the differences, how it has to be resolved, there are different styles of the men and women. Increasing women's participation in politics and the public sphere makes economic sense, and the plurality of women's perspectives strengthens the national security also. The international community should better involve the women in peace processes to help achieve sustainable peace and more effectively build the amicable relationships between the entities in conflict. So, peace agreements and reconstruction are more sustainable and effective when women are involved in the peace building processes. So, bringing women to the peace table improves the quality of agreements, and that is reached by that peace development. It also enhances the likelihood of implementation, because you see the unique skill sets and the experiences that a woman possess, that is very important. Women are disproportionately impacted by war, and their experiences are distinct from men. So we see that although women may carry a heavier burden than men during war times, their experiences, their views, and their skills are often undervalued and underutilized in the resolution of conflict. So as a result, women continue to be underrepresented in leadership positions throughout the world. And the international organizations, they need to work towards ameliorating all these representations imbalances. And the organizations need to take gender into account when planning to peace through legal activism that provides for the needs of the women. So this is all important. Historically, we see that controlling parties have ignored or excluded women from the negotiation table, and women often encounter overt discrimination when attempting to influence the armed conflict resolutions. And we see that in armed conflicts, women, children also, they are often the overwhelming victims as rape, sexual slavery, and other forms of sexual violence. that are used as the weapons of the war in international conflicts. So there is also an overwhelming dependence on the women in post-conflict societies due to the deaths of the husbands and the fathers and other male members in the during that conflict. So this further demonstrates the impact of the armed conflicts on women, and then their role, that how to resolve these conflicts then become very important. And it is like a devastating impact on the women and girls of the on this armed conflict. And that also demonstrates the need for the peacemakers to include women in the efforts to end the war and to prevent its reoccurrences rather, I should say. It is not only a recurring factor, but reoccurrence is also to be stopped and prevent. Further, any attempts to redress the harms the women experience as a result of the armed conflict must include a role of women in peace processes. We see in India, in Northeast Indian states, they have taken the lead to initiate the conflict resolutions, where they protect and promote the rights of the tribal women and tribal people, especially the women. And interestingly, you may be aware that the women's group that have worked on conflict resolution in Northeast have adopted certain strategies how to do or how to go about by that. So this building leadership and enabling them to understand the concepts of disarmament and non-military techniques to establish peace, and then focusing on their economic empowerment. These are some of the strategies which are being followed. So we know that if the women is economically empowered, if the women is being trained as to how to focus on the military techniques, so that to establish the peace, and how to give them a participation in the leadership program, how to make them aware. So by this women empowerment, they are trying to make that the women's have been given a specific role, and the rights of the women are protected and promoted, especially in the Northeast states in the country, in our country, that is in India. And then creating an enabling environment also to nurture their leadership. So if the women are in leadership, then of course they'll be considered to be not only women empowerment, but the economically empowerment is also being conferred upon, and they are focused on that issues. So these strategies have enabled the women in placing their on the negotiating table. Also, they are representing in various committees, and which contributes towards the governance and peace building. So some initiatives like ensuring enhanced presence of women in elected bodies, reservation for women in the government services, that is creating the strong women's pressure group also. And the larger women participation in national forums, implying more and more women in the paramilitary forces, to designate the women guards as in the relief camps during the armed conflicts, that is going a very long way. And that is the real empowerment of women, through which they can enjoy their role in the conflict resolution and the development of society. The Indian judiciary is also performing very important role, and very recently it has allowed the women participation, and women has been allowed for a permanent commission in the military services also. So if more and more women will be adopted in the or appointed in the military forces, then of course this role of women would be more and more important towards resolving the differences, to bring the peace. And for that peace building, we see that this is one field where not enough is being done to include women. But the judiciary in India, the Supreme Court particularly in India, is performing its duties wonderfully by allowing the women to participate in the militancy, to participate in the other conflicts impacting humanity resources, you see. So women who is sitting at the negotiating table for peace seems to be a very important issue, though it was considered to be a very distant dream, but with the interference or with the interpretation of the rights of women on the basis of the equality, on the basis of our Constitution of India, as well as the international provisions, we see that the women are now being allowed to participate in these type of the things. But still, we have to see that all these orders and the judgments of the Supreme Court are being translated into practice or not. This is one of the issues. So the women, as we all know, by nature are different from men, but affect the conflict dynamics at the societal and individual level. The role of women in resolving the differences and conflict can best understood through individual levels and the societal level. So individually, women are by nature so completely different from men, and that we experience in a different reality. Like women, they are caring, they are cooperative, and peaceful attributes are seen in the women, and the maternal abilities of the women that as shapers of the role as caretakers and peacemakers, that is established. So without ruling out their differences from men, and specificity of the women's experiences, which they experienced under the patriarchy system in India, relating to the differential access to different types of the works, different types of the fields of work, areas into conversation also. That is being found. So there seems to be a paradigm shift that speaks of the transformation of social relations of gender, class, and race, and exercise of the social power. And at the societal level,
Excuse
patriarchy.
me, Professor, your time is about to run out.
Oh,
Is it possible for you to wrap up? Thank you very
yeah,
much.
yeah, yeah, sure, sure, sure. So my point is here that if we need that there should be differences are to be resolved by women's participation, then we find that UN is also doing, UN women working workers, they are to increase the availability of the gender expertise. UN women works closely with the civil society organizations, and they are organizing the strengthening the civil societies organizations. They are supporting and developing the regional networks of the women leaders and women mediators. There are various other, we see that networks which are working at the UN level for introducing or for giving the rights to the women to establish this peace building, whether it be African network of women in conflict prevention and peace meditation, or Commonwealth women mediators network, or support and development of regional women's mediator network. So there are many, and they all share the tools and knowledge to strengthen the capacity of the women mediators, we see. So women have to play a greater role in conflict prevention and resolution. Towards this goal, India has been training the women peacekeepers and from around the world. And though there is a need to increase the institutionalize and the involvement of women in conflict prevention and resolution, so we see that India has also committed to provide another all-female formed police units. Sexual violence was a legitimate threat to women, to peace, for the which women and girls had to be protected and empowered as a part of the counter-terrorism or hostage efforts. So we see that women have begun to play an important role in conflict resolution, peacekeeping, and defense, and foreign affairs mechanisms also. They are, though they are underrepresented in decision making, but if the women are to play an equal part in securing and maintaining peace as per the constitutional provisions in India, an active and visible policy of mainstreaming a gender perspective. So all these are need to be promoted more and more, so that they may take their role, they may participate in the decision making levels, and they can increase their decision making levels, resolutions in which they have to participate and protect the women living in situations of the armed and